The ballroom was alive with laughter, clinking glasses, and the soft hum of conversations. Chandeliers sparkled overhead, casting golden light on the polished marble floor. Guests in elegant gowns and sharp tuxedos moved gracefully between tables, their expressions a mixture of delight and mild curiosity. It was one of those evenings where wealth, influence, and power met under the guise of celebration and charity. Everyone knew someone important here, and no detail seemed too small to be noticed. Amid all this glamour, a young woman moved quietly, her footsteps soft on the polished floor. She wore a simple uniform, a crisp white shirt tucked neatly into a black skirt, an apron tied carefully around her waist. She had been working here for months, knowing that nights like this were exhausting but necessary. She moved from table to table with a practiced ease, her hands carrying trays of champagne and delicate hors d'oeuvres. She knew the routine by heart, yet she kept her mind alert, noticing who looked uncomfortable, who might need a refill, and who simply wanted a quiet moment to enjoy the evening. She had learned long ago that in a room like this, being invisible was sometimes the best way to survive. Guests often paid little attention to her, treating her as part of the background, an object rather than a person. Most conversations passed over her without acknowledgement. But tonight, for reasons she could not yet understand, she felt the air of expectation in the room shift slightly whenever she approached a table. At the far end of the ballroom, near the grand piano that gleamed under the lights, a man stood with a presence that made everyone else seem small in comparison. He was tall, impeccably dressed, and carried himself with the kind of confidence that comes from knowing you hold the attention of everyone in the room without even trying. This man was a billionaire, well known for his business ventures, his wealth, and occasionally his sharp sense of humor that could be cutting if misdirected. He observed the guests around him, occasionally raising a glass, occasionally sharing a word that drew laughter, but his eyes kept returning to the young waitress who moved among the tables with quiet efficiency. He noticed something about her immediately. Perhaps it was the calm way she handled the rush of the evening, or the way she kept her head high even when no one paid her any mind. Or maybe it was the brief spark of awareness in her eyes when she noticed how people looked at the room, how she seemed to see more than what was obvious. For reasons he could not quite explain, he felt intrigued. He called for a waiter to come closer, whispering a plan that seemed to make the man smile. Then, in the midst of a group of guests, he raised his voice just enough to be heard, loud enough to catch everyone's attention. "Tell me," he said, "can anyone here play the piano?" There were polite chuckles and a few nods. Several guests glanced toward the grand piano, some suggesting friends or acquaintances who could entertain. But then he did something unexpected. His eyes fell on the young waitress, and without hesitation he added, "Or perhaps you, young lady?" The room froze for a moment. Conversation stopped mid-word. Glasses paused in mid-air. The guest's eyes turned toward her, curiosity mixing with mild amusement. She froze too, a tray still in her hands. The smile that had barely touched her lips faded slightly. A mix of surprise and panic rippled through her mind. Was he serious? Was this a joke? Everyone here thought she was just part of the background, part of the service that kept the night running smoothly. She was not supposed to be noticed, much less asked to step into the center of attention. She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came. Her heart raced. She had never played in front of anyone, certainly not in a room filled with wealthy strangers, not under bright lights that made her feel as though every movement was being magnified. Yet beneath the fear, something stirred. It was a faint, almost forgotten confidence, a memory of hours spent alone, practicing in quiet rooms, losing herself in the music that no one ever listened to but her. The billionaire's gaze did not waver. There was a hint of a challenge in his eyes, a mix of curiosity and expectation. He raised an eyebrow, waiting for her response. The silence was heavy, almost unbearable. Guests whispered to each other, some giggling, some shaking their heads. Many assumed she would decline. How could she, a mere waitress, play the piano in such a glamorous room? Surely she would bow politely and retreat to her duties. But she did not move away. Her hands, trembling slightly, released the tray she had been holding, and it landed on a nearby table with a soft clink. The guests flinched at the sound, but the noise was nothing compared to the silence that followed. She walked toward the grand piano, each step measured, deliberate. The golden lights reflected off the polished wood, the ivory keys gleaming like a promise. She could hear whispers behind her, guests speculating, some doubting, some already anticipating a comical disaster. She reached the piano and paused, Her fingers hovered over the keys, unsure at first. Her chest rose and fell rapidly but slowly. She felt her fear transform into something else. It was not courage exactly, but determination, a quiet insistence that she would not let this moment pass without trying. She remembered the long hours she had spent practicing in her small bedroom at home, the music that had been her companion through loneliness, through worry, through days when life felt heavy. Tonight, somehow, all of that experience had brought her to this moment. The billionaire leaned slightly forward, a small smirk playing on his lips. He expected hesitation, perhaps a nervous laugh, maybe a refusal. Instead, he found her sitting at the piano, straight-backed, poised, and ready. The guests watched, intrigued despite themselves. Some leaned closer, unsure of what they were about to witness. The room had shifted from polite amusement to a kind of tense anticipation, a collective holding of breath. She pressed her fingers lightly to the keys, testing the feel of the piano, the weight of the notes under her touch. The first sound was soft, almost tentative. A single note floated into the air, fragile but clear. The guests shifted in their seats, adjusting to the sudden change in the room's energy. That note, so simple and unassuming, seemed to stop time for a moment. Even the billionaire, who rarely showed surprise, paused, his eyes fixed on her hands. The waitress closed her eyes briefly, allowing herself to sink into the music. What started as one simple note became a small series, each following the last with growing confidence. She could feel the rhythm, the pulse of the melody forming beneath her fingers, something she had known instinctively but had never shared in front of anyone. The notes filled the room, delicate and precise, almost like whispers, but strong enough to reach every corner of the ballroom. For a few moments, the guests remained silent, unsure whether to applaud or speak, whether this was a performance or a mistake. The air itself seemed to bend around the music, softening the tension, transforming the room from a space of opulence and social posturing into something intimate, shared, and alive. The young woman at the piano was no longer a waitress serving food. She had become a musician, a storyteller, and every note she played carried a piece of her soul. The billionaire, watching closely, felt a strange shift within himself. His expectation of a comedic spectacle evaporated, replaced by genuine curiosity and admiration. The way she handled the keys, the subtlety of her movements, the emotion in the sound, it was more than talent. It was authenticity. Here, in the middle of a glittering ballroom filled with money and status, someone had reminded him of something rare and real. The young woman's heart continued to beat rapidly, but her hands moved with increasing certainty. She had faced this moment alone in her small practice space countless times. Now, she was doing it in front of dozens of strangers, under the gaze of a billionaire who had dared her to try, and yet, something deep inside her told her that this was exactly where she was meant to be. The music was no longer about proving herself to the room. It was about allowing the music itself to speak, to reach anyone willing to listen. Guests began to lean forward slightly, drawn in by the unexpected depth of her playing. The laughter and chatter of before had faded completely, replaced by an almost sacred stillness. No one moved, no one spoke, no one dared interrupt the delicate unfolding of the music. Even those who had doubted her quietly felt a sense of awe. The young woman at the piano had transformed the room in an instant, and no one could look away. As she continued, the first part of her melody came to a gentle pause. She lifted her hands just slightly, taking a breath, and for the first time looked up. The guests' faces were filled with surprise, curiosity, and admiration. The billionaire's eyes held something close to disbelief, but also a quiet respect. He had expected a joke. Instead, he had witnessed the beginning of something extraordinary. And in that moment, the waitress realized something as well. This was no longer about being unnoticed, about blending into the background. This was about the power of courage, the willingness to step into the unknown, and the quiet truth that sometimes life's most remarkable moments arrive when you least expect them. The first note had been simple, but the impact of that simple note would echo far beyond this ballroom, setting in motion a story that no one present would ever forget. After the first gentle notes hung in the air, a ripple of anticipation passed through the room. Guests who had been casually observing now leaned forward, eyes wide, silently holding their breath. The waitress sat at the grand piano, her fingers poised like dancers on a stage, ready to bring the music to life. She felt her heart beating rapidly, but this time, the rhythm was not only from fear, it was excitement. a quiet thrill that something magical was beginning to unfold. The first melody she had played was soft, almost hesitant like a small introduction, a greeting to the room. But now she allowed herself to go deeper. She let her hands move with greater confidence, guided by years of private practice, by nights spent alone playing until her fingers ached and her soul felt free. The keys responded to her touch, producing sound that was richer, more layered. The music began to tell a story, one that no one could predict. The guests were spellbound. Conversations had completely stopped, and even the staff, who were usually busy moving between tables, had paused to watch. The room, previously filled with the noise of wealth and status, had transformed into a place of pure attention. Every eye followed her hands as they moved across the keys with grace. Every ear drank in the harmony she created. Even the glittering chandeliers seemed to dim in comparison to the brilliance of the moment. It was not just the skill of her playing that captured everyone, but the emotion behind it. Each note seemed to carry a memory, a feeling, a piece of her life that no one had ever known. The music was playful at times, delicate at others, then bold and commanding, filling the large room without a single word. Guests could feel it in their chests, in their minds, in the quiet spaces between each note. Some closed their eyes, letting the sound wash over them, transporting them to a place beyond the luxurious hall, beyond the expectations and judgments that often came with it. The billionaire watched intently, his initial amusement replaced by genuine fascination. He had expected a simple, perhaps clumsy attempt, a moment of entertainment to amuse himself and his guests. Instead, he was witnessing something extraordinary. She was no longer a waitress. She was a performer, a storyteller, a conduit for emotion that no one had anticipated. The smirk that often played on his face faded, replaced by wide eyes and a slight leaning forward, as if to ensure he didn't miss a single moment of what was happening. With every chord, the music grew in complexity. Her fingers moved almost effortlessly, guided by instinct, by memory, by a deep connection with the piano that only those who had spent countless hours alone with an instrument could understand. It was not just technical skill, it was artistry. The way she transitioned from soft, gentle melodies to bold, commanding notes held the room captive. Every guest, no matter their status or wealth, felt the impact of her music. Some of the older guests, who had attended countless events and performances, whispered to each other, astonished. "I've never seen anyone play like this," one murmured. "She's extraordinary," said another, shaking her head in disbelief. Even those who prided themselves on sophistication, who had seen every kind of talent imaginable, found themselves leaning closer, unable to turn away. The music seemed to bypass all social barriers, all pretenses, and touch something human and universal within everyone present. The young woman at the piano was fully immersed now. Her initial nervousness had transformed into flow, into a sense of being exactly where she needed to be. She could feel the room responding to her, the subtle shifts in posture, the quiet gasps of surprise, the attentive faces. Each note became a conversation, a shared secret between her and the audience. She was telling them a story without words, and somehow they were understanding it perfectly. For the billionaire, the moment was humbling. He had expected to entertain himself by daring a waitress to perform in front of the elite, expecting at most a polite decline or a nervous failure. Instead, he was confronted with undeniable talent, raw and authentic. It was a reminder that brilliance can be found in the most unexpected places, that people are often underestimated based on appearances and roles. He felt a surge of admiration, tinged with the knowledge that he had inadvertently uncovered something rare. Meanwhile, the other guests began to notice small details that made the performance even more impressive. Her posture, relaxed yet precise. The way she anticipated the keys, as if they were extensions of her own thoughts. The subtle changes in tempo, the delicate pauses. The way she allowed certain notes to linger, creating tension and release that drew listeners deeper into the music. Every aspect of her playing spoke of discipline, of patience, of years of unseen effort and love for her craft. Some younger guests, who had initially been skeptical, were now leaning forward in astonishment. "She's amazing," one whispered to a friend. "How can someone so ordinary look so extraordinary at the piano?" They could not reconcile the image of a modest waitress with the mastery of her performance. It was as if she had opened a door to a secret world that no one had known existed. A world where passion and dedication outshone social class, wealth and expectation. As the music progressed, it shifted in mood. The melody became lighter, more playful, drawing smiles from some of the guests. Then it turned more serious, with chords that carried a weight of emotion that made even the toughest businessmen lean in and close their eyes. The young woman allowed herself to be carried by the music, letting it flow through her as naturally as breathing. She did not think about who was watching or judging. She only thought about the sound, the feeling, the story she wanted to tell with her hands. The sounds began to fill every corner of the ballroom. Guests in the farthest seats could hear the subtle rise and fall of the melody, the soft echoes of emotion bouncing off the walls. It was as if the piano itself had become alive, a living presence speaking directly to everyone in the room. The young woman's connection with the instrument was undeniable. She was no longer playing keys. She was painting with sound, sculpting the atmosphere with each touch. The billionaire, who had moments before been considering how to tease her, now felt a sense of awe. He could not hide his reaction. His eyes followed every movement, his lips slightly parted, and for the first time that evening he was silent. The power dynamic he had assumed, billionaire versus waitress, was irrelevant here. In this moment, the music held dominion and she was in control. The audience, too, felt it. There was a collective sense that something rare and beautiful was unfolding, a shared understanding that they were witnessing a talent that could not be taught or bought. Even the staff in the room, who had grown accustomed to the background noise of wealthy guests and elaborate events, paused in admiration. Some whispered to each other, trying not to draw attention, but unable to resist commenting on the skill they were witnessing. The young woman had captured the attention of everyone in the room, not through her appearance, not through her words, but through the undeniable power of her music. As she played, she began to notice small details in the audience. Faces softened with emotion. Eyes glistened as memories were stirred. People shifted in their seats, drawn in by the ebb and flow of the melody. Some clutched hands together, some leaned back, letting the music wash over them. Each response reinforced her confidence, encouraging her to continue, to explore further, to allow herself to be fully present in the performance. The melody grew more intricate. Her fingers moved faster, yet each note remained clear and precise. The room felt like it was holding its breath, as if the walls themselves were listening, as if even the chandeliers were pausing to admire the artistry. The music was no longer just sound. It was a language, a story, a bridge connecting her to every person in the room, regardless of who they were or what they believed about her. Time seemed to stretch. What could have been a few minutes felt like an eternity of beauty, emotion, and connection. The young woman, fully immersed in the music, did not notice the passage of time. She was not thinking about the reactions, the applause that might come, or the judgment that might have been. She was living the moment, allowing the piano to speak her truth and, in doing so, touching the hearts of everyone present. By the end of this part of her performance, there was a palpable shift in the room. The initial skepticism, the whispers, the expectation of failure, all of it had vanished. In its place was wonder, admiration, and a shared recognition of talent. The young woman, sitting at the grand piano, had not only captured the attention of the guests, but had reminded them all of something essential: that true skill and passion cannot be hidden forever, and that sometimes the most extraordinary moments come from the most unexpected people. She lifted her hands for a brief moment, not as a gesture of finality, but as a pause, a breath, a small invitation for the audience to absorb what they had just experienced. The room was quiet, the air thick with emotion. The billionaire's expression had softened into one of awe, his usual confidence replaced by genuine admiration. He had expected entertainment. Instead, he had been humbled, reminded of the depth and richness of human talent. And in that moment, something shifted for everyone. The young woman at the piano had transformed the room, not through wealth, status, or presentation, but through the undeniable force of her music. She had proven that courage, skill, and authenticity could command attention in a way that no wealth or power could ever match. And as the next notes began to flow, richer and more intricate than before, everyone in the room realized they were witnessing the beginning of something truly unforgettable. As the music continued, the atmosphere in the ballroom shifted completely. The initial curiosity and surprise had transformed into deep, silent admiration. The young woman's fingers moved across the piano keys with a grace that seemed almost effortless, yet there was a quiet intensity behind every note. It was as if she were speaking directly to each person in the room through the music, telling stories that words could never capture, Guests who had come expecting a light-hearted performance were now utterly captivated. Some leaned forward, their faces softened with awe, their eyes glued to the movement of her hands. Others, who had initially shared doubtful whispers or stifled laughter, now sat in stunned silence. The music had a way of filling the entire space, wrapping around every corner, every listener, binding them together in a shared moment of wonder. Even the waiters and staff who had been quietly observing from the edges of the room had stopped moving. They watched her in amazement, wondering how someone so modest, so unassuming, could create something so extraordinary. The billionaire, who had issued the dare moments before, could hardly believe what he was witnessing. His expression had changed completely. The amusement and playful arrogance he had carried vanished, replaced by genuine admiration and something deeper, a respect he rarely showed. He found himself leaning slightly forward, studying her movements, noting how every note was deliberate yet flowing, precise yet full of emotion. For a moment he realized that he had underestimated her in a way he rarely did with anyone. It was not just her technical skill that amazed everyone, it was the way she made the piano sing with feeling. She played with emotion, with nuance, with subtle pauses that drew the audience in, inviting them to listen, to feel, to connect. Each chord seemed to carry a story, a fragment of experience that made the room vibrate with anticipation and engagement. Some guests closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them, allowing themselves to be carried by the rhythm and melody. Others stared in silence, unable to look away, mesmerized by the unexpected brilliance in front of them. The young woman's fingers moved faster now, her confidence growing with each passing moment. What had begun as tentative notes had transformed into a flowing, intricate composition that seemed to surprise even her. She had not planned this, yet the music unfolded naturally, as if it were coming from a place within her deeper than conscious thought. She could feel the rhythm in her chest, in her hands, in every fiber of her being. She let herself be carried by it, trusting the music to guide her, trusting the audience to follow. As the piece developed, it shifted through a range of emotions. There were playful moments, light and joyful, that made even the most reserved guests smile softly. Then came passages that were deep and somber, filled with longing and tenderness, and it was impossible not to feel the weight of them. She let herself move with the music, swaying slightly, leaning into the piano, allowing the story to flow from her fingers. It was as though she had opened a door to her soul, and everyone in the room was fortunate enough to witness it. Some of the guests, who had initially come expecting a glamorous event with polite entertainment, were now quietly moved to tears. A few elderly attendees dabbed at their eyes with handkerchiefs, overcome by the emotion carried in the melody. Younger guests whispered to each other in disbelief, asking, "How can someone play like this? Where did she learn?" No one knew her story, and yet the music made them feel as if they were glimpsing it, feeling the journey she had taken in life. The hours of practice, the quiet moments of struggle, the patience that had led to this night. The billionaire, still watching, felt a strange mix of admiration and humility. He had challenged her, expecting a moment of humor at her expense, and instead, he had been confronted with undeniable talent and raw emotion. He realized that talent could be found anywhere, and that appearances were often deceptive. The young woman had taught him an unexpected lesson that evening, that brilliance often hides in places people least expect, and that courage combined with skill could captivate even the most skeptical audience. Her performance continued to evolve. She shifted seamlessly between soft, delicate passages and bold, commanding chords. The music flowed like a river, at times calm and gentle, at times surging with power and intensity. The room responded with collective stillness, as if the audience were holding their breath, reluctant to break the spell that had taken over the space. Every note was intentional, every pause meaningful. The young woman's connection to the piano was undeniable, and it radiated outward, touching everyone who listened. Guests who had been talking quietly moments before now sat in complete silence. Even the waitstaff, who had seen countless performers in their time, could not believe what they were witnessing. She had transformed the grand piano into a voice, into a storyteller, into a bridge between herself and everyone in the room. It was more than music. It was an experience, one that transcended the ordinary and reminded everyone present of the power of talent and dedication. As she continued to play, she noticed small reactions from the audience. A couple near the back exchanged a glance of astonishment. A young man in the front row whispered to his companion, unable to hide his amazement. The older guests nodded subtly, acknowledging the mastery unfolding before them. Even the billionaire, who had moments before been skeptical, leaned slightly forward, unable to look away, his usual confident demeanor softened by the beauty of her performance. She allowed herself a brief moment to breathe, a slight pause in the music that only made the audience lean closer, anticipating the next phrase. It was a delicate tactic, one she had unconsciously developed during her private practice sessions. By giving a small pause, she created tension, drawing the listeners in, making them part of the story she was telling. The effect was profound. The room was silent, yet the energy was palpable, almost electric, as everyone waited for the next note to flow from her hands. Then she continued, moving into a passage that was both technically complex and emotionally powerful. Her fingers flew over the keys, each movement precise yet fluid, demonstrating mastery that could only come from years of dedication. The melody was intricate, layered, and alive, each chord resonating with clarity and depth. Guests felt as though they were being carried on a journey, traveling through moments of joy, sadness, reflection, and triumph. The young woman was no longer simply playing the piano. She was guiding everyone through an experience they would never forget. The billionaire, still watching, could feel his heart quicken. He had expected a simple, polite entertainment, a minor diversion from the usual gala festivities. Instead, he was witnessing something transformative. He realized that he had underestimated her, that he had misjudged the quiet, modest waitress who moved among the tables with apparent ease. Her talent was undeniable, and her presence, while unassuming, had grown into something commanding, something unforgettable. The guests' reactions were equally profound. Some leaned back in their chairs, letting the music wash over them, eyes closed, feeling the emotion of each phrase. Others sat forward, captivated, unable to tear their gaze away from the movement of her hands. Whispers of admiration began to ripple quietly through the room, though no one dared interrupt the flow of the performance. "She's incredible," one guest murmured. "I've never heard anything like this," said another, shaking their head in disbelief. Even the staff who had been working the room could not hide their amazement. They exchanged glances, silently acknowledging the rare talent unfolding before them. The young woman had taken a dare, a simple challenge, and turned it into a moment that would be remembered long after the night ended. It was more than just a performance. It was a statement, a reminder that true talent could not be contained, that brilliance could emerge from the most unexpected places. Her fingers moved with increasing confidence now, the music flowing effortlessly. She let herself be carried by the melody, allowing emotion and intuition to guide her. It was not about proving herself anymore. It was about sharing something deeply personal, something that connected her to the audience without words. The room was completely engaged, and she could feel the collective energy feeding her performance, encouraging her to reach higher, to express more. As the piece neared its climax, the music swelled, filling every corner of the ballroom with richness and intensity. The chandelier lights reflected off the polished keys and the glossy wood of the piano, adding a visual brilliance to the auditory experience. Guests sat mesmerized, some with eyes wide in disbelief, others with soft smiles, tears glistening in the corners of their eyes. The young woman had become the center of the room, not because she sought attention, but because her talent demanded it. Finally, she began to bring the piece to a gentle close, softening the intensity, allowing the melody to fade with a sense of resolution and calm. The last notes hung in the air, delicate and lingering like a whisper that refused to disappear. The room was silent for a moment, suspended in awe before the applause began. It started softly, then grew steadily until the entire ballroom erupted into clapping, cheers, and whistles. Guests rose to their feet, some moving closer to offer personal congratulations, others simply standing in respect for the performance they had just witnessed. The billionaire, who had started the evening with a playful challenge, now approached her with a smile of genuine admiration. He extended his hand, not to tease, but to acknowledge her remarkable talent. "That was extraordinary," he said, his voice sincere. "I did not expect anything like this. You have a gift." She smiled quietly, a mixture of relief and pride washing over her. The moment had been terrifying, exhilarating, and transformative all at once. And as she sat there catching her breath, she realized that something had changed forever. The room that had once been full of strangers now seemed connected through the shared experience of her music. She had taken a dare, faced her fear, and emerged not just unscathed but celebrated. The power of her talent had been recognized, and in that recognition, a door had opened, a door to possibilities she had never imagined, and a reminder that courage and dedication could turn even the smallest challenge into a life-changing moment. The applause continued to echo through the ballroom long after her fingers had left the keys. It was not the polite clapping of an audience who had seen a nice performance. It was genuine, heartfelt, and spontaneous. People stood, some moving closer to see her better, others simply staring in awe, as if they had witnessed something miraculous. The young woman, still seated at the grand piano, felt her heart racing. She had done it. She had transformed fear and uncertainty into a performance that had captivated an entire room of strangers. Guests began approaching her cautiously, almost reverently, as if they were stepping into a sacred space. They offered congratulations, extended hands, and asked questions about her training, her background, and how she had learned to play with such skill and emotion. Many could not believe that someone so young, so modestly dressed, and so unassuming could command such mastery over the instrument. The room buzzed with excitement and curiosity, but it was different from the usual chatter at these kinds of events. There was respect here, deep and sincere, for a talent that had appeared unexpectedly and left no one indifferent. The billionaire who had initiated the dare approached her slowly, his expression one of admiration and humility. He had expected to provoke laughter or amusement, perhaps a few awkward notes, but he had witnessed something far greater. He extended his hand not in jest but in acknowledgement of her skill. "That was beyond anything I imagined," he said. "You have a rare gift, truly extraordinary." His voice carried a sincerity that even the most practiced socialites in the room could recognize. It was not flattery. It was recognition. She accepted his handshake with a quiet smile, feeling a mixture of pride and disbelief. Other guests now crowded closer, eager to speak with her, to learn more about the person behind the music. Some wanted photographs, others simply wanted to express their admiration. The young woman who had spent much of her life blending into the background was suddenly the center of attention. It was overwhelming, but in a way that felt positive, almost magical. She realized that she had crossed an invisible line, from being unnoticed to being celebrated, all because she had embraced a moment of courage and let her talent shine. The energy in the room shifted further when reporters and social media enthusiasts, who had been quietly observing from the edges, began to document the event. Cameras flashed, videos were recorded, and live posts appeared, capturing the awe on every face. The story of a humble waitress who had mesmerized an entire ballroom, including a billionaire, began to spread almost instantly. The attention was unexpected, and while it made her heart pound, it also filled her with a sense of possibility she had never experienced before. Guests who had been skeptical at the start of the evening were now completely enchanted. They whispered to one another, marveling at how talent could appear in the most unlikely places. "She's remarkable," one whispered. "I never would have expected this from someone so unassuming." Another shook their head in disbelief. "It's incredible how she makes it look so effortless. I've never seen anything like it." Every reaction reinforced the truth that her performance was extraordinary and that the impact she had made was profound. The young woman herself began to relax slightly as the attention became more structured. She had expected judgment, criticism, perhaps even ridicule, but instead she found admiration and respect. For the first time, she realized that her skills were not just private accomplishments. They could inspire, move, and connect with others. The piano, once a companion in solitude, had become a bridge between her and the world, allowing her to communicate in a language that everyone understood. Even the billionaire seemed to be processing what had just occurred. He had been a spectator, a provocateur, and yet now he found himself humbled by the depth of her talent. He reflected on the assumptions he had made, the casual dare he had given without expecting real consequences, and he realized how wrong he had been to underestimate her. He smiled at her again, this time with genuine warmth. "You have changed the way I think about talent," he admitted quietly, so only she could hear. "Sometimes the most extraordinary things are hidden in plain sight." As the room continued to buzz with conversation, the young woman began to notice subtle signs of change around her. Guests who had been distant and reserved were now more engaged. asking questions, sharing compliments, and seeking connections. The staff, too, seemed energized by what they had witnessed, talking quietly among themselves about the rare gift they had seen unfold in front of their eyes. It was as if the performance had awakened something in everyone, a reminder of beauty, talent, and courage that could not be measured by social standing or appearance. The media attention began to grow, and soon people from outside the event were calling to learn more. Reporters, bloggers, and music enthusiasts wanted interviews, photographs, and stories about the young woman who had captivated an entire room with her music. She was suddenly at the center of a narrative that extended far beyond the walls of the ballroom. Her life, which had previously revolved around modest work and quiet practice, was now filled with opportunity and recognition she had never anticipated. Despite the excitement, she remained grounded. She spoke politely, answered questions with humility, and shared her experiences without exaggeration. She knew that the attention, while flattering, was not the purpose of her talent. It was the result of dedication, passion, and the willingness to embrace a moment of courage. She had not sought fame, yet she understood that her performance had touched people deeply, and that she could use this moment to inspire, to open doors, and to continue growing in her craft. The billionaire, who had initially intended the dare as entertainment, became a surprising ally. He offered support, not just in praise but in practical ways. He spoke to influential guests, suggested opportunities for her to perform, and even arranged introductions to music teachers and event organizers who could help her develop her talent further. He recognized that her gift was rare, and he wanted to ensure it reached its full potential. For her, this unexpected support was a reminder that kindness and encouragement could come from the most unexpected places, even from someone who had initially challenged her with a dare. As the night progressed, more people approached her, sharing stories of how her performance had affected them. Some spoke of memories that were stirred, moments in their past that her music had reminded them of. Others expressed admiration for the courage it took to play in front of a crowd so intimidating. The young woman listened, smiled, and thanked them sincerely, realizing that her music had created a ripple effect, touching lives in ways she had never imagined. She also reflected on her own journey. The countless hours spent practicing in her small room, the times she had felt doubt, the moments when she had questioned whether her talent would ever be recognized, all of it had led to this night. The performance was not just an expression of skill, it was the culmination of persistence, passion, and self-belief. She understood in a profound way that talent alone was not enough. Courage, opportunity, and the willingness to step into the unknown were equally important. By the end of the evening, the atmosphere in the ballroom had transformed. What had begun as a glamorous event with polite social interaction had turned into a celebration of human potential, creativity, and the unexpected brilliance that could be found in anyone. Guests left with a sense of wonder, carrying with them the memory of a performance that had defied expectations and touched hearts. The young woman left the grand piano for a moment, stepping back to collect herself. She felt exhausted but exhilarated, a strange mixture of relief and joy. The room was filled with whispers of admiration and respect, and she realized that her life had changed in ways she had never anticipated. She had faced a challenge that had seemed impossible and turned it into a moment of triumph, not just for herself but for everyone who had witnessed it. As she looked around, she noticed the small, subtle ways in which the evening had shifted. Guests were more open, conversations carried a sense of excitement and inspiration, and the mood of the room had become warmer, more connected. She understood that music had the power to change not just the immediate moment, but the environment around it, creating a shared experience that people would remember long after the night ended. The billionaire, observing her from across the room, approached once more. He spoke quietly, offering encouragement and expressing his admiration again. "Tonight, you showed everyone something rare," he said. "Talent like yours doesn't come along often. Remember this feeling and use it to guide you forward. You have the ability to inspire more than just this room. You can reach far beyond." She nodded, grateful for his words, but more importantly, she felt a quiet affirmation from within herself. She had proven to herself what she was capable of, and that realization was far more powerful than any external recognition. By the time the event drew to a close, The young woman had been approached by dozens of people, all offering congratulations, support, and opportunities. Her phone had begun to buzz with messages from people she had never met, journalists, music enthusiasts, and organizers eager to know more about her. She felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness, but above all, she felt a deep sense of gratitude. She had faced a moment that had terrified her, embraced it fully, and in doing so, had opened doors she never imagined. The evening ended with a final round of applause, this time not just for the music, but for the courage and authenticity that the young woman had displayed. She had stepped into a world that often overlooked people like her, and had reminded everyone present of the beauty that could be found when someone dared to share their true talent. The experience was transformative not just for her, but for everyone who had witnessed it. As she walked away from the grand piano, she felt a quiet confidence settling over her. The applause and admiration were important, but the real reward was the knowledge that she had faced her fear and succeeded. She had embraced a challenge, allowed herself to shine, and discovered that courage, talent, and authenticity could change lives, including her own. The night had started as a simple dare, a playful challenge by a billionaire who wanted entertainment. By the end, it had become a moment of profound connection, admiration, and inspiration. The young woman knew that this was only the beginning, that her life had shifted in ways she could not yet fully comprehend, and that the opportunities that lay ahead were now possible because she had dared to step forward, trust herself, and play.